Hello and welcome back to Analog Comics. Today I get to finally talk about The Killer. And there is quite a lot to cover actually, even about the publication history of The Killer. And in this video I'll be more focusing on the English publication of The Killer. As the name kind of gives away, this is a story about The Killer, a paid assassin. Originally published in French by Casterman, and the creators are Jacquemont and Mats. Jacquemont being Luc Jacquemont, the artist, and Mats being Alexis Noland, using his pen name Mats as a writer. I always knew I'm going to do a video about this comic book series, but now there is so much good stuff happening to the series in general that I decided now it's the time to make the step and actually do this. Well, first of all, just as it says on the cover, this will be coming out as a Netflix movie. And it's directed by none other than David Fincher. Main character is played by Michael Fassbender. Being a Netflix movie doesn't mean that it's going to be great, but at least we got some heavyweight Hollywood names working on the case. In fact, the movie has already premiered at the 80th Venice International Film Festival. Then there'll be later, quite soon there'll be some limited theatrical release. And after that small window for the theatrical release, it will be in Netflix in November. As far as I know, there's going to be just one movie on Netflix about this. And I don't know if it's going to be something taken from this long story arc or if it's something just in the same kind of world. I have no idea. I'm hoping it's good. I'm going to watch it anyway, but that's not the main point. The main point here is The Killer, the original comic book. And that leads us to the messy history of the publication of The Killer in English. And now I'll jump into it, and in case you want to understand anything about it, you'll have to pay attention. And before I start to list the different ways The Killer has been available and still is available, some facts you have to know. First, the original story of The Killer was 13 albums long. So they were made in 13 separate European albums. However, it has never been published in that format in English. My history with The Killer is that I originally read the first 5 albums in digital form. It was through Comixology before Amazon bought it and killed all the fun in that app. So in the end, I finally got those 5 first albums in Finnish. And this is everything that has been published in Finnish. The first hardcover has the 3 first albums, and the second one has 2 more, so it's 5 together. And this is a strange publication because it kind of looks like an album, but it's actually much smaller. It's even smaller than the US comic book size. So when I'm talking about The Killer as a complete series, I have only read these 5 albums so far in digital and in analog format. And what I'm going to say about the book and the quality of writing and the graphics and everything, it's all based on these 5 albums. But in earnest, I don't think that the quality of either will suffer in the long run, because these 2 artists are so in the zone, so in focus, and they have their own way of coming into this subject that is easily done in a very cliched way usually. But this is something different. Okay, so that was my history with The Killer. I only have read these 5 albums. And just to make this a little bit more messy, here is all The Killer albums, the 13 albums in English in one book. So why did I say that I have only read the 5 first ones? Well, I just only received this few days ago, and as it happens, my wife and I have been married for 3 decades, 30 years, and now she decided to start reading comics. And she asked me what she should read. And one of the books I gave her was these The Killer comics. She already read them, loved them, and now that this arrived, we had a bit of an argument. Who's going to get it first? She won. So now I'm going to have to wait until she gets through all the albums, and then I get to enjoy the rest of the story arc that I've been waiting for years to read. But you know how it is. Happy wife, happy life. That's how I go. But in order to explain the publication history clearly, we have to put this away, and instead I'll show you this one, a hardcover collection of more The Killer stories. And this has nothing to do with the original series, but I'll come back to that later. I just use this as an example. So the magic number you have to remember is the 13. That there was 13 albums in total that made the original The Killer story arc. And in my opinion, the best way to collect them would be this hardcover format. First, I talk about these hardcover volumes, because this was the format that got through the whole series. All the 13 albums have been collected into these hardcover volumes. This is also the format that I would prefer. However, the availability of these is really bad. I've never seen the complete set available, so I was very skeptical to jump into that. I already had those first 5 Finnish albums, but I thought that I'd rather have most of them in kind of one format. And I was looking for this. The way they did that is that the first volume had 3 albums, the next one had 2, then the next one had 3, and then 2, and then 3. So it went 3, 2, 3, 2, until all the 13 albums were collected. There are a few things you need to know if you start hunting for these particular hardcover volumes. The 2 first volumes didn't have a cover like this. In fact, I think they even didn't have the dust jackets on them. Just hardcover. And the covers were exactly identical, but they have a different kind of color hue in them. And it just said volume 1 and volume 2. And then starting from the volume 3, they started to name the books. The third one was Modus Vivendi, the fourth was called Unfair Competition, and the fifth one was Fight or Flight. So that's one thing you need to know. And also the spines were different in each of the books. And this is actually a good point to tell you that one thing I forgot to tell you, that all these books are published in English by Archaia. The photos I show here is something I just found when I was Googling and trying to find some kind of info about the physical copies. So this is the only evidence I have at the moment. I have never seen complete sets looking anything else than these. So I believe this is the way that they were originally published. And then for those who rather collect single issues, floppies, that is a one route too, but there is a big but in that way, because you run into a dead end. You see, the first 6 albums were originally published as single volumes. And the way they did it is that each album was divided into 2 single volumes. But those volumes are marked very clearly. Like the first story is Long Fire. So it says Long Fire Part 1, Long Fire Part 2. So it's easy to know how to collect that album in 2 single issues if that's your thing. So that is the system that they went through the 5 first albums. But then the thing changes. They did publish 3 more albums in single issues also. Each album divided into 2 single issues. You see, the 6th album was called Modus Vivendi, the 7th was Ordinary Mortals, and the 8th one was The Natural Order of Things. But now the single issues don't go with the same logic as the 5 first ones, where they had the name of the album and then it says Part 1 and Part 2. These last 3 albums that were published in single issues, they all have name Modus Vivendi, name of just the one story. And then they are numbered from 1 to 6. And I think it's because it follows the hardcover version that I showed you in the beginning. That was called Modus Vivendi, and it included all those 3 stories. So somehow the single issues now just follow the name of that hardcover book. And it doesn't list the names of these separate albums, although it did that earlier. I don't know who decides this thing at Archaia, but I don't think this is a good decision. It's very messy. But the end result is that the 8 first volumes were published in 16 single issues. And that's where it ended. So that's a dead end. Just in case you want to go that way, you have to know that you're not going to make it, or the story all the way to the end. And then we get to the omnibus format. There was also an omnibus collection about the killer. And it was just volume 1 and volume 2. That's pretty simple, except that's also a dead end. Because the volume 1 has only 5 first albums in it. The volume 2 has the 5 next albums in it. So if you want to go with the omnibus way, you only get to the 10th album. And then if you want to finish the whole saga, meaning to get to those 13 albums, then you'd have to find the last 3 albums in that hardcover format. It was called Fight or Flight. That has the 3 last stories. And that was one of the ways I thought I could do that, but I never find the volume 1 omnibus. I did find volume 2, so again there was no complete set available, so I declined to buy that either. And that all leads us to this, the complete, the killer. And this is the complete, except not exactly, but I'll come to that a bit later. But this has the complete original The Killer series, 768 pages. It's quite a thick volume, all by Archaia. This is in soft cover. It's the omnibus size, so the regular US comic book size. However, this is a peculiar case because the graphics being beautiful, they actually work just as well being a bit smaller. I know that's a rare comment from me, but there are those things. This is one of those exceptions. And in case you want to go the same way and have everything in one volume, just know that this is the second edition. The first edition had a little bit different type of cover. And this second edition that I have, this is the first printing. So I think there has only been one extra print since the first complete edition. As this is the first printing and this has been done in 22, so I don't think there has been had time to have another printing. And what they did is they obviously did this because it's coming to Netflix and now they can put it on the cover to make it more sellable. But it also shows you how difficult these have been to get, as the first printing have been sold out long time. And even finding these is difficult. I mean, I found this one in UK and it took me a month to get it through that Brexit wall. The shipping is really bad at the moment. But anyway, now it's here. I got all of them. Oh, and one thing that I noticed when trying to find more info about any of these publications is that I've seen these complete editions being also sold or marketed as hardcover, but I have never seen a photo of a physical copy of a hardcover version. So I don't know if they actually exist, because those who sell them as a hardcover, they just have this general picture of the cover there and then they are listed as hardcover. But I haven't seen any proof that there is a such thing, just so you know. This is a soft cover, and as I said, over 700, almost 770 pages. Says The Killer, Archaia, Yakamon, Mats. At the back there is all the covers collected, and I am a bit hesitant to look too closely to the back of the book, because as I said, I have only read the 5 first albums, but I tried to show some of the panels and some of the pages during this video anyway. So now that we got that messy history of the publication out of the way, let's talk about the comic itself. And in case it was a bit too messy explanation, just put a comment, ask something there, and I'll try to answer if I can. The Killer is a thriller. It's a thriller story, and it has a heavy dose of noir in it. It also has quite a lot of action, but I wouldn't say that it is an action comic. I have seen people commenting on the book that it's really great action. But I personally don't think that that is the main point of the series. But that only shows that there are clearly different layers in the story, and different readers, they kind of anchor themselves into the different things they see in the story. But one of the biggest reasons why this whole the killer thing kind of clicked for me is how it handles the subject, the theme of assassin, being a paid killer. Because this really goes into the mind of the killer. And at the same time, keeping that mind distant. It's something that you get to see, but don't get to know. Even during those 5 albums that I read, it showed so many different ways to kind of come to the scene of violence, and kind of how it presents them to you, what kind of questions they give to you. Because there are certain scenes where the book kind of forces you to answer the questions that the killer is asking, although he's kind of talking to himself. Like there's one very cold-blooded and chilling scene where he asks, like, would you like to be woken up before you're killed? Would you like to have that short moment to say bye-bye to the life? This book really does those things. And sometimes things are not that gruesome. Sometimes we just see the end result of a hit. There's a body. And sometimes it's very messy, really gruesome. Sometimes it's clean. Sometimes we see the killer planning it, and that's all. So there are different kind of moments in the life of the killer that we get to see that are not often talked about in those type of comics or stories. Usually it's just about the action, the execution. By the way, that text in my thumbnail for the video, execution is everything, that is taken from the Netflix movie Banner. I just thought that that is a really smart sentence in this context, so I had to put it there. So in case you want to see in these kind of books just running and gunning, this might not be for you. This is more personal in a way. It puts you in the situation where you see the fear, the sheer terror of the people who are going to be killed just in a matter of seconds. And you are following the main character, the killer, that has absolutely no remorse. He doesn't care about his victims at all. He doesn't care about the reasons why these people are killed. It's business. And although many of the deaths are pretty gruesome, he doesn't enjoy the violence at all. The violence is just a necessary thing to accomplish what he is paid to do. As sometimes his clients who are ordering his work, they have specific demands how the death has to happen. Does it have to look like an accident? Or maybe it has to be done in a very violent way to send a message. So the way the writer has done it, we are all the time hearing the conversation that the killer is having with himself. Sometimes the context makes it so that you feel like he is asking things from you as a reader or talking to you. And then suddenly it kind of rewinds back. And although we see some glimpses of his past, they are very superficial. And the killer himself states that he doesn't care about his past, not about his parents, his sisters, brothers. He doesn't care where they are and how their life is at the moment. And he has chosen to be alone. However, during the series, there are certain people who get a bit closer to him. And I think that's necessary to make the story interesting. But even that adds and kind of strengthens the idea how there is always that certain barrier between him and the rest of the population. Another theme running through right from the beginning is also his mental health, because there are moments when he is cracking. And that is also shown very nice way in the graphical format. The panels show you when his kind of thinking and mental state is cracking. And this brings us conveniently to the Yakamon's art, which is absolutely beautiful. In fact, the art is so necessary part that it really fulfills the text and the other way. And one thing I need to mention also is that Yakamon is also doing colors. And here, the colors are like the third artist almost. They are really important pieces how they kind of complement each other. For example, that deliberate distance that the killer has in the story. The writer has made him, in a way, very cold and distant from the reader. That is only enhanced by the graphics, because the character, the figure of the killer, is very cartoony compared to anything else in the book. In fact, his face is so cartoony that it sometimes reminds me of Tintin. Because if you think of Tintin and its world, the world around Tintin is very realistic, very clear and realistic. But Tintin himself, his head is only like a balloon, and then there are two black dots as eyes. And that's him. And the killer character has the same features in a way. His head is like just a balloon. He's not as cartoony as Tintin, but compared to anything else within this comic, he is very cartoony. In fact, some of the panels use photographs as a base to the graphics. It's not that much, but still, all the worlds are very believable. And even all the other people there are very lifelike, very realistic. And then when you look at the killer, his face is the most unnatural thing, and that is a great way to distance him even more, because that kind of cartoony characters also gives the reader more room to insert his or her kind of own feelings and thoughts into the character. And to make sure that the killer stays distant, Yakamon has added classes to the killer, and those classes have that old school classic effect that where they kind of reflect all the time so that you don't see his eyes. There are moments, very particular moments, they're clearly chosen carefully. Those moments where you see his eyes, but even then it's usually very little and from the certain angle. But they have always a storytelling purpose. So even the graphics are part of the storytelling very strongly, and they combine and strengthen the writing. This is something that I really much like about it. And then when you add the colors, it has really vibrant colors. Like when the comic book takes you to a nightclub or a city at night, or at the daytime, or in the jungle, or in some exotic beach. The color palette in those cases are so that I think it shows you what we as humans collectively always think that those places look like. That's how I feel about it. They are just strongly that way. But at the same time, they also reflect the mood in the scene, and especially in the head of the killer. And I'm talking about the killer all the time because that's his name in the book. At least during those 5 books, that's all we get. Even the people closest to him only know him as the killer. And if there has been any conversation outside the frames about the names and that, it doesn't show. And the only time they mention one name with the killer during these 5 albums I read, you know that that's a fake name anyway. And against my nature, I have said that this comic works as well, even in this a little bit shrunk down size of the US comic book. And I think it's because the way Yakamon does details is that he doesn't really do details. I mean, if you look at the panel, you feel like it's full of stuff, and it is. And you feel like it's full of details, but I think what he is doing is an effect of detail, not the actual details. It's different when you look at the Jeff Darrow's art. When you look at his panels and details, you know they're all there, they're real. Even if you kind of expand the panel, you'd see a million things. But here, I think it's more like making an effect of having a lot of details. And it comes with the coloring, the lighting effects, and all those details. So Yakamon is using different techniques to get that same feeling, the result. And I think this is a very important reason why I haven't been actually thinking about the smaller size at all. It's been fine. But now there is more content out. And this is where this book comes back into equation. I don't know if it was the fact that the creators knew that there was a Netflix movie coming out, or it was just a happy accident, but the creators decided to bring back the killer and start a new story arc. And that story arc is called The Affairs of the State. And this hardcover volume has 3 more albums in it. However, even that's not all. That seems like a catchphrase for this video, but I know that in French in 2022 there was 4th album published, and that hasn't been translated yet to English. So there are 4 albums in French, but only 3 of them have been now translated and published in English. But if this goes the same way as the previous hardcovers, I think there'll be another, like the 5th album more, and then they translate it as a hardcover, those 5th and 6th. I don't know, maybe there'll be more. And I've seen that also these stories have now been translated in the single issues, and they are all called The Affairs of the State, and then they're just numbered, if that's the way you want to go. So I'm pretty happy man at the moment. I got the original 13 albums finally, and now I even got the extension to the storyline. And maybe in future we got the rest of the stories when they first come out in French. Oh, and for those who are still watching, I have to remind you that it is a European comic album, so on top of the violence, there's lots of nudity. Yeah, that just happens. There are those evil female nipples you can see. But that was the complete Killer. It is a great, great story, and it takes a very fresh and brave angle to a subject of assassins and killers that are usually almost overused. So this is something I highly recommend. But now I have to go because I have to tell my wife to read faster, and I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.